Can we start now in the classroom? Thank you for coming today. My name is Caron Balkany. I'm one of the co-authors of the Ambush Grand Jury. I'm going to be facilitating this press conference, and I'd like to ask you if you would please follow a couple of ground rules. We have several people who have very important things to say to you. We want to make sure they get the chance to do so, and that the media gets the chance to ask some questions. So here they are. We're going to take questions from the media only. We know there's a lot of interested citizens, and we would like to talk to them afterwards in a group. So please, media only questions at the press conference. So second ground rule then is, media, would you please identify yourself? We're going to save all questions till the end of the press conference. We have a little change in plans from what we were hoping to have happen today, as you will soon see. I'd like to first introduce Jacque Brever, sitting right here, who will be our first presenter.
Hi, I'm Jacque Brever. I was a worker at Rocky Flats for nearly 10 years in plutonium recovery operations. I was the first employee to testify to the grand jury. Someone tried to kill me to shut me up and keep me from testifying. I went into hiding for nearly 10 years, and I went to college. I'm now an environmental scientist with a master's degree in environmental policy and management, and I've worked on several other Superfund sites. So, I've done some research. I've read over 16,000 pieces of paper that DOE says comprises their cleanup and closure documents. DOE says, in response to this research that I've done and this report that I've prepared, that we're looking at old data, we being the citizens investigators. I agree. We are looking at that DOE data that is detailed in the cleanup and closure document. Not only is it old data, some of it is falsified. And it was used for characterization and remediation of the site, as well as for the no further action designation data, which the regulatory agencies agreed to and signed off on. This data is from the late 1980s and the early 1990s. So we can start on here. DOE is performing an accelerated cleanup on the former Rocky Flats nuclear weapons plant, which is significantly contaminated with radioactive and toxic waste put into the environment for more than 40 years. Plutonium recovery operations and nuclear weapons production was the cause of this environmental contamination. Making a nuclear weapons trigger makes a lot of secondary hazardous and radioactive waste. We hid all this behind the cloak of national security for nearly 40 years, our ad hoc waste disposal practices. DOE plans to complete the accelerated cleanup of Rocky Flats by December 15, 2006. The contractor performing the cleanup stands to gain a $340 million bonus for meeting or exceeding that deadline. A significant portion of Rocky Flats will become the Rocky Flats National Wildlife Refuge, where the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service will manage the site and proposes to allow recreational activities such as hiking, biking, and horseback riding. The center, most contaminated area of the site, called the industrial area, where plutonium operations took place, will be imploded, left in place. So what we will have in the Denver area is a radioactive hazardous waste landfill surrounded by a wildlife refuge where humans, people, will be allowed recreational access. And this is all 16 miles upwards of Denver, of course. Congressman Udall agreed to accompany me and my fellows here on a tour of Rocky Flats so that I could show him areas of contamination that I was concerned about that were not being properly addressed in the cleanup. The only conditions that I put on that tour was that I would be allowed to bring my people and that I would be allowed to bring the media. Although DOE frequently invites the media out to Rocky Flats on their own terms, DOE steadfastly refused to allow us to bring the media. The tour was canceled. This is the reason for this paper and this press conference. I went and completed research to see what other areas of concern I might have. This resulted in months of research, which ended up in being about a 70-page paper, which got boiled down to this paper, which I assume you all have, which is only 4 areas of my concern. My concerns are much greater than what's in this paper. The 2 original areas of concern that I had were not listed anywhere in the more than 16,000 pages of documents, paper pages that I read. And those are the duck pond and the Windside landfill. This area here, the duck pond, we workers regularly took out radioactive hazardous waste solutions in bottles and dumped them outside the building in an unlined pond. This is not in a wetland. It was essentially an unlined deep mud hole that was filled with water and ultimately radioactive and toxic waste. This, what I'm calling our slang for this, was called feeding the ducks, which had nothing to do with people, workers actually going out there and feeding ducks. This was our slang for that. The Windside landfill, we went out there and buried radioactive pumps and other pieces of equipment and covered it with shovelfuls of dirt. I've not seen this mentioned anywhere on any cleanup documents either. Further areas of concern that I have regard the East Spray Field. Those would be right here, where I have several concerns there. Number 1 being that DOE stated that the permit for the pond and the sewage treatment plant and the pond freak data were representative of what was sprayed on the spray field. That was their characterization of the spray field. DOE repeatedly knew that radioactive and hazardous constituents were placed in the sewage treatment plant, which ended up sprayed on the spray field, or released into the pond, which ended up in the drinking water supplies for Broomfield, Westminster, and other communities. But DOE failed to notify the EPA of violations of their permit of having radioactive and hazardous constituents in this water. Finally, the area of the East Spray Field, I believe, is much larger than DOE designated as such, and included areas even more contaminated, such as the irrigation system was sprayed over the heavily contaminated East trenches, which are located and this is not in any kind of document or rec. The final area discussed in the paper is the 881 hillside. DOE determined that 10 of the 11 areas investigated to have radioactive and toxic contamination. DOE minimally cleaned one area by removing a small amount of surface soil. 2 other areas, DOE says it cleaned up the radioactive contamination to levels slightly higher than the EPA allowed, violating their own standards. The remaining areas, DOE left the residual radioactive and toxic contamination and did nothing, stating the justification being there is no pathway for the contamination to get out. Although elsewhere in the same document, DOE admits that this area is prone to landslides, slumping, and erosion. DOE further states that it will place institutional controls in this area to make sure that the radioactive and toxic contamination will remain in place. There are several problems with this. The area is immediately upgradient of where U.S. Fish and Wildlife plans to have intensive human access. They plan to do construction and construct facilities for people to be out there in observatories, a photography station, and so forth. This area here, they plan to actually do doing restoration and revegetation. And this area here, they plan for public off-trail use. This area of 881 Hillside comprises the 9 areas that I already spoke about. These 2 areas right here comprise the areas where they actually did some cleanup, but they left levels of radioactive and toxic contamination slightly higher than the action levels they all had agreed on with state. Like I said, DOE says that the majority of the radioactive contamination is in the form of plutonium dioxide and will therefore not migrate. In the first place, we use plutonium in many other forms than plutonium dioxide, some of which are soluble and will migrate. Those are not in the cleanup documents I read. As was proven by at least one trial scientist, that heavy winds and precipitation common in the area do indeed migrate the plutonium dioxide. Construction, restoration, revegetation, and public activities will cause migration of the contaminants. Next, DOE has repeatedly stated that they've taken hundreds of thousands of samples verifying levels cleaned up or to be cleaned up. To that, I say garbage in and garbage out. DOE has been criticized by the EPA OIG, Office of Inspector General, for data falsification, mishandling of laboratory data, and CDPHE, the State Health Department, has harshly criticized DOE laboratory with data results, data handling, quality control, quality assurance practices. Further, CDPHE states that their sampling data agrees with that of DOE. I would therefore question their data as well. This paper began at about 70 pages long, but I have many more concerns about the cleanup at Rocky Flat and the proposed recreational activities there. It's certainly up to you whether you want to go out to Rocky Flat and allow your children to roll around in the dirt. But I would be less than a moral human being if I have this knowledge about this cleanup and reuse of Rocky Flat and did not at least make an effort to let you all know what you're getting into when you go out to play in the radioactive field at the former Rocky Flat nuclear weapons facility. And finally, I have to say that I have a thing called the purple and green polka dot theory. And that's when we know that Rocky Flat is dangerous and it's secret and it's kind of cool to go out there and look around. And we go out there and look around and we don't walk away with purple and green polka dots. So we think we're okay. 20 years from now, when we have cancers or 3-headed children or whatever else, we wonder, was that caused by that day that I went out there and rolled in the dirt at Rocky Flat? Rocky Flat, in my opinion, is not safe for human access and will never be safe the way they are conducting the cleanup now. Thank you very much.
People you see at the table here are all all volunteers. There is not anybody doing this for money. I want you to know that. Jackie has the qualifications to be doing this for money now, but she's disabled. I think you heard her voice. Jackie has thyroid cancer now, and it is one of the radiogenic diseases caused by exposure, one of the diseases caused by exposure to radioactivity. So thank you for undergoing more stress to bring this information out to us. I'm going to introduce you next to Jon Lipsky.
Hello, my name is Jon Lipsky. I came here as a private citizen to tell you about the dangers of recreation at Rocky Flats. I took vacation time to come here. Yesterday at 5:54 p.m., just as my family and I were driving into Denver, I received a call from the FBI ordering me not to talk about the Rocky Flats case. So I can't tell you what I came here to tell you. However, I can tell you again, as a private citizen, that I have reviewed this report Jacque Brever wrote about the problems with the cleanup. I can tell you that Jackie's report is accurate. What she wrote in it is true. I hope you will pay attention to it. There are other major problems and dangers from recreation at Rocky Flats. And some important parts of what DOE has told the regulators about the contamination of Rocky Flats is just not true. As a father and a fellow human being, I urge you not to allow recreation of Rocky Flats. There are too many dangers, too many things you just don't know about out there. I deeply care for the people of Colorado, and I love my country. I'm sorry I can't tell you more. Thank you.
That was the change in plans that I alluded to earlier. I'd next like to introduce Wes McKinley, the co-author of the Ambush Grand Jury and the foreman of the Rocky Flats Grand Jury.
We heard the evidence and the witness. Was Jackie unreliable? We heard after her testimony that her testimony was unreliable. We didn't know that. We see lots of documents. And then we read in the paper about investigations outside of our own. And how old is old data? You know, I used to think 60 years old was old. Now I'm thinking something over 100 years old. When you have a substance that lasts 24,000 years, 15 years, 20 years is not old, it's current. How good is the data? In Memo 5 of the sentencing memorandum, you can read where there was the industrial pollutants sprayed throughout the spray field. Memos 6, 7, and 8, you can read a report done in 87, which shows elevated levels of contaminants. You can read where the east spray field had runoff that went into Walnut Creek. That's all in the sentencing memorandum. And a lot of times we have heard that our statements, even in the book, unsubstantiated, were true, based on speculation. There is one way to find out. Are we speaking the truth? Do we know what we talk about? Right down the street, not far, there's a federal courthouse, and locked in there is a report, there's indictments, there's a million pages of documents, and there's reams of testimony. You can read every word that should be public record. That was the oath we took to uphold the nations of our land. We have a system of government and a system of justice, a system of laws that works, that makes liberty and justice for all. We want liberty and justice for all to be equal for all, not 2 or 3 different levels of it. We stood up, and sometimes they say it's bravery that makes us stand up. In my case, it wasn't, and I hope it won't be in yours or some reason. But if you notice, when you sit down long enough, the seat will get hot after a while. So especially when it's plutonium activated. So maybe we can all stand up. Maybe we can stand up. And do we need to play a Rocky Flats? Colorado is a pretty big area. And this stuff's going to be sprayed up, kicked up. It's invisible. You can't see it. But you want your children out there? You want to see 15-year-old kids stricken with leukemia, cancer, thyroid cancer? Ephraim Zimmerman Jr. instilled in us the sense of the FBI. John, thanks.
Some of the things Wes was alluding to are in the book, The Ambush Grand Jury. I wasn't really going to speak, but I just want to say one thing about that. Part of the Justice Department cover-up that we documented in that book included trying to call citizens to come forward with information on survival. And that's what Wes was referring to. The Justice Department called Jacque Brever, who was at that time a plutonium worker under subpoena before the grand jury, unreliable. It turned out that everything that she told them proved to be true. And the reasons for calling her unreliable becomes very obvious when you look at the motivations to cover up what the Rocky Flats grand jury was really doing and what the Justice Department didn't want them to do. So with that clarification, I would like to introduce to you Dr. Niels Schonbeck.
Good morning. My name is Niels Schonbeck. I'm a professor of chemistry at Metropolitan State College of Denver. I've been a member of 4 citizen oversight committees concerning Rocky Flats starting in 1988 through 2002. 3 of them specifically concerned with scientific and technological issues relevant to establishing public policy. I want to make a few comments about plutonium toxicity, uncertainty in estimating health effects, and the importance of citizen participation in the public policy process. As I'm sure you know, plutonium is a radioactive metal with a half-life of 24,400 years. Radioactivity results when nuclei of atoms have too much energy, one cause of which is that the nucleus is simply too big, such as the case with plutonium. Now, radioactive atoms solve their problems by spitting pieces of their self out, pieces of the nucleus shot out, in order to, and in doing so, releases a tremendous amount of energy. Plutonium emits the largest of these pieces, called an alpha particle. It's shot out of a nucleus like a bullet out of a gun, and delivers about 5 million times as much energy as an ordinary chemical event. For example, one chemical event may break one chemical bond, whereas one radioactive alpha emission can lead to the breakage of 5 million chemical bonds. This leads to damage of genetic material and, of course, cancer and other disease states. Thus, very little plutonium can cause disease. The lethal dose to the lung has been estimated between 1 and 35 micrograms. A microgram is a millionth of a gram. Less than lethal doses, less than this amount, can still impair health. Now, there's huge uncertainty about health effects of lower doses. The variability is mind-boggling. For example, Radiological Assessments Corporation estimated in a 2001 publication that 90% of the time, the health effects factor, which we call relative biological effectiveness, or RBE, a factor for bone cancer ranges between 10 and 160, 90% of the time. The other 10% of the time, the health effect is less than 10 or greater than 160. This month, it has been reported in the New Scientist that a committee of British radiation experts were unanimous in saying that the cancer risk of plutonium could be 10 times higher than we now currently assume. That means that the RBE, that health factor I mentioned, might actually range roughly from 100 to 1600. It also means that the plutonium left at Rocky Flats should be 10 times lower than anyone presently thinks. This is another example of why we should err on the side of caution. As science progresses, the so-called acceptable amount of plutonium continues to decrease. Public policy should take a conservative posture, should use the higher health effects factors, and leave much less plutonium in the soil. The most dangerous pathway of exposure to plutonium is inhalation. Plutonium metal exposed to air undergoes a rusting process that gives tiny particles that can be breathed into the lungs like air. All plutonium in the environment is in this form of tiny particles that bind tightly to soil. Any soil disturbance will resuspend these particles and enter the lungs. From here, plutonium is transported to other tissues. Most of the inhaled or ingested plutonium stays in the body essentially for the lifetime of the individual. Now, I want to go back to the possibly lethal dose of 1 millionth of a gram. From the half-life of 24,400 years, we can show that over 2,000 atoms of plutonium disintegrate. That means give off an alpha particle every second. Every second, 10 billion chemical bonds are broken. Not just now, but for the lifetime of the individual. The current agreement for the so-called cleanup process is that rocky flats cannot leave more than 15 picocuries of plutonium per gram of surface soil down to 3 feet. I object to the term cleanup because it implies returning a place to its original state. Before Rocky Flats was built, background plutonium in the soil, which came from weapons testing, was 500 to 5,000 times lower than what Rocky Flats will call clean. Most citizens wanted the site to be returned to background levels. It will take between 220,000 and 300,000 years for the natural decay of plutonium to return today's 50 picocuries per gram at Rocky Flats to what it was in 1951 before ground was broken to build the site. If we were honest, we would not call this cleanup. I couldn't figure out a better term. I'll leave it up to the media to come up with a better term than cleanup. Because of the bonus structure built into the lifetime, or to the timeline of closure of Rocky Flats that was mentioned before by Jackie, it appears that science is taking a back seat to profit. Kaiser Hill stands to gain hundreds of millions of dollars if they, quote, finish on time. When I took my students to Rocky Flats for a tour, which we do every semester, we asked about the 903 area, where thousands of barrels of plutonium waste, toxic waste, leaked into the soil. For years, we've estimated the amount of plutonium at the 903 pad and came up with a number something like 11 curies. When they went to remediate the site, lo and behold, they discovered 10 times as much plutonium than anyone had ever estimated. So we asked, my students and I, isn't it likely that there are other sites for which plutonium contamination has been grossly underestimated? Both Kaiser Hill and the regulating agency opined that they were, quote, 95% sure that there are no other such spots. My students were dumbfounded. My only conclusion is that logic and science are subservient to business as usual. My involvement with Rocky Flats began in 1985 when I met the late Dr. Edward Martell, a nuclear chemist at the National Center for Atmospheric Research in Boulder. Martell was the scientist who discovered plutonium in the soil offsite of the plant in 1969. His report was the first knowledge that the public had of plutonium contamination from Rocky Flats, and it forced Rocky Flats to reveal prior plutonium releases that had been kept secret from the public, particularly the 1957 fire and the 903 area leakage of plutonium that I mentioned, which occurred in the 1950s and 60s. From then until now, I don't have time to go into all the details, but from then until now, citizen involvement in Rocky Flats has been crucial. Now we need to know what the grand jury knows in order to safeguard public health. Without this information, we will allow recreation at Rocky Flats on toxic deposits of plutonium, not just for a few years. Let's imagine 100 years. We don't know what's out there, but let's just say, pick a number, 1,000. 1,000 pieces of plutonium. In 100 years, 997 of those pieces still remain. The time it takes for plutonium to return to non-toxic levels is estimated between 250,000 and 500,000 years. Now, these numbers are not something you and I really have an appreciation for. We can write the numbers down, but what does it mean? Remember, we had a great fanfare in the year 2000 when we reached the millennium. And we went back and looked at reports when it happened 1,000 years before, in the year 1000, and marveled at the enormous amount of time. That's 1 millennium. 250,000 years is 250 millennia put end to end. It's incomprehensible. If you want to talk about stewardship of the environment, what is going on here has been and is absurd. The cover-up at Rocky Flats revealed by this book, The Ambushed Grand Jury, is not a new phenomenon in the history of U.S. nuclear weapons. What is news is that our government agencies were caught red-handed, in the words of the authors. What remains is what will our community here in Colorado do about it? We have the opportunity now to restore some small measure of faith in government. We must counter the fundamentally anti-democratic ways by which we arrived at this point. In light of the environmental laws that have been violated and the fact that public health is at stake, we insist on total openness. We must all insist on it. I suggest a change in business as usual. Release the grand jury documents, protect public health, not private profit.
I'd like to introduce Erin Hamby from the Rocky Mountain Peace and Justice Center, one of the co-sponsors for our conference today.
Good morning. My name is Erin Hamby, and I'm a coordinator of the Rocky Flats Working Group at the Rocky Mountain Peace and Justice Center. The Rocky Mountain Peace and Justice Center is a membership-based community action center. We have worked on issues surrounding Rocky Flats since we opened our doors in 1983. It is because of information like you heard here today that we've joined in this press conference. Knowing that the regulators and the public have been misled about contamination in the areas presented today calls into question what else has been overlooked, left out, or misrepresented. A new study suggests that alpha radiation, like that the plutonium emits, may be 10 times more dangerous than we previously thought. We feel that all information that is known about Rocky Flats contamination should be known by the public. The cleanup at Rocky Flats is not yet complete. There should be no rush to finish if the cleanup will remain incomplete and dangerous. Because the communities around Rocky Flats suffered, the plant was shut down in the first place. It should again be because of the surrounding communities that we insist on a thorough cleanup of Rocky Flats. 86% of the people who commented on the proposed cleanup agreement rejected it. It is imperative that the public be heard and fully considered in cleanup decisions at Rocky Flats. These communities not only have the right to be involved, but they have a right to have voices that count in decision making. To those ends, the community should know as much as possible so that important decisions are also informed decisions. The technical information contained within the now sealed grand jury documents is very relevant, and these documents should be released for the sake of public safety and health. The Rocky Mountain Peace and Justice Center will formally petition the court to release the Rocky Flats grand jury documents. We have already requested and been denied access to the documents by John Southern, the U.S. Attorney, District of Colorado. The documents must be released in full, and they must be released for public review. We feel that the content of these documents would be useful in assuring the best possible and the safest cleanup at Rocky Flats. We also want to stress that any review of the grand jury documents must include members of the public. Thank you all for attending this afternoon, and I'll now turn it over to Caron to direct questions from the floor.
As we're closing now the presentation, I just want to leave you with one question of my own. Why is the Department of Energy trying so hard to make sure that the public and the media does not have access to all of the information about what happened at Rocky Flats? Why is this man not allowed to speak as a private citizen, tell us what happened. Why are the grand jury documents still sealed? Those documents are not Rule 6E documents. They are technical documents describing the contamination and the waste streams at Rocky Flats that pre-existed the FBI rate. So by definition, they are not Rule 6E. What's going on here? Now you get to ask the question. Yes, sir.
Rick Salinger, Channel 4. I realize you're limited in what you can say, especially if Lipsky today. Yes, we come forward to say.
More questions?
How do you feel about the going to be submitted?
Actually, I've been ordered not to answer any questions about the case, so.
I'm not asking about the facts of the case. I'm asking about you, as you feel you might have rights as an American citizen to speak and being told not to.
All I can say is I've been ordered not to answer any questions about the case.
And that's going to unfortunately have to be his answer to any of your questions. He's gone as far as he can without disobeying a direct order, and I think that exhibits an incredible amount of bravery. I wouldn't want to push him anymore. So thank you. This is not at all what we had planned, but that's what happened yesterday at 5:45. And again, I guess you can ask yourself why. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, in Russia, on your map, two clarifications that Rocky Flats says that the industrial area is going to be fenced when it becomes a refuge in your documents to imply that you believe otherwise. Could you clarify that? You also seem to show the parts of the refuge to be either in or really close to the industrial area. Could you clarify that? Sure.
Okay, the first question,
Whether the industrial area will be fenced.
and therefore Wildlife Service said over and over again they want a seamless boundary at Rocky Flats. They do not want this area fenced. It's my understanding that currently, at this time, DOE is discussing fencing the area. Some citizens are saying it's due to their efforts, however, in one of the documents that I read, the institutional control, one of them that was required for DOE to do was to fence the area. So, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is not going to get their seamless boundary. DOE will have the last word on that. And I'm sorry, your second question?
Whether the refuge buildings will be in the industrial area or near.
There will be myriad. This here is the industrial area. The refuge will be today, as this is current as of now. DOE, like I said, will have the last word on the property they will be turning over to the Fish and Wildlife Service. As it stands today, this dotted line is the boundary of everything outside, with the exception of the mineral rights gravel extraction area, will be the wildlife refuge. These areas here are some of the areas U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service proposes for human access. Over here is going to be a visitor center, parking lot, and so forth. Here is going to be public off-trail access. There's going to be lots of restoration and revegetation going on. These gray areas here on the map are DOE areas indicating areas prone to landslide and erosion. Like I said, Fish and Wildlife Service is going to be doing stream restoration and revegetation in a lot of these areas. I wasn't, for brevity on the map, so you could read it, I couldn't put all of them on there. The main areas of human access will be here, this constructed area of observatory photography, environmental educational facilities, off-trail access, visitor center, parking lot, and so forth.
Any other questions?
I'm Daniel Costello from KGNU Public Radio in Boulder. I have a question for
Dr. Schonbeck. If the refuge is opened as planned, won't the remaining contamination be measurable or detectable by a person like with your expertise? And won't they be caught in the end? Will the cover-up of those sites be revealed?
Well, as I understand it, most of the contamination that we're concerned about is not right on the surface. I mean, if they're going to clean up the surface, the 50 ppm per gram. Certainly you can measure that if you have the right instruments. The big concern is what's underneath. Below from 3 feet to, I think it is 6 feet, they can have 7,000 ppm per gram. Below 6 feet, they can have any amount. In other words, I'm not, the big concern is not today in terms of large contamination, although the 50 ppm per gram is way too high in my opinion for public health. But what happens when the soil erodes? What happens over a period of years when these buried sites are exposed, and then the contamination will be much higher than the levels that are committed.
When there's access to these places that you've been denied access to, wouldn't you be able to, get down into that? Is there any instrumentation you could use to get down to the depth?
I mean, it's complicated. I mean, you have preliminary readings on certain instruments. Others, you have to take samples and send those to the laboratory. But yes, you can certainly detect that. The trouble is, it's a huge site. It's over 6,000. The buffer zone plus the plant is over 6,000 acres. And so, how are you going to find it all? I mean, I think the tourist said that the way to clean up is by sampling, which is absurd. You can sample every single square centimeter of rocky flats on the surface down to the depth. So it really is an enormous and impossible project unless you want to excavate the whole site. The basic idea is to stabilize it and just fence it off. Let people know that this is not a place to recreate.
What about the specific places like on the map there, the landfills that are not in the cleanup documents? Couldn't you, once access is open, couldn't a person go there and say, hey, here's right here?
Sure.
So what do they,
But that's after the fact, and it's all done. We would like to, we want to basically, I would like to see the whole arrangement changed. I don't think recreation is a wise idea.
So you think it'll be proven right?
All right, we need to let people ask the question. Thank you very much.
Any other questions?
Question for anybody who'd like to answer. Either speak to that.
How's that from the Daily Camera? I understand that Plutonium's half-life is 24,465 years, whatever number you want to use, a long time. The cleanup process has been moving along since October 2002, and my understanding of it, and I've been going to meetings and things like that, is that it's an evolving process, at least to some extent. So I guess I have a real fundamental question as to why there wasn't more recent updates to, say, the maps or the work you did than October 2002.
You want to direct that to?
I guess, Jacque, whoever wants to address it. I mean, they're all sitting up there, but the data's 2 years old, and the cleanup's been ongoing, and that's just a basic question.
I think I can just sort of briefly answer you. The
Sure.
data is DOE's most recent data, and this was provided to us by the DOE. So I'm not.
As of when?
Month ago? Month ago. Any other questions?
I'm Ken Gilman from Westford. For those who haven't read the English Century yet, you may not know that the account of Jon Lipsky leaving a raid on Rocky Flats is in their book, so where can people get the book now until it's published in March?
The book is available at the website, which is ambushgrandjury.com. As I said, it is a nonprofit book. It's also at Tattered Cover, Borders, Amazon.com, Barnes & Noble. And yes, you're right. And the Rocky Mountain Peace and Justice Center. It does contain Jon Lipsky's discussion of what went on in the grand jury investigation to a large extent. So thank you for reminding me of that. Any other questions?
First, would any of you like to address whether you think the state health department and EPA oversight of this cleanup has been adequate?
I will. Anybody else wants to? No? Anybody else? Anybody else? And a lot of that, I believe, is in part due to the very complicated situation they're in vis-a-vis the DOE. But regardless, the answer is no. Not gonna. The false documentation that's in the DOE cleanup documents was submitted to the EPA back in 1981. They got caught by the FBI submitting that false information. It's public record that they were caught by the FBI submitting that false information. Rockwell pled guilty because of that false information, and the DOE is giving it to the EPA again in these cleanup documents. Now, shame on the DOE, but shame on the EPA and CDPAG for not catching it. This is public record. Any other answer? Any other questions? Thank you for coming. If there are members of the public who want, and I see you out there, who want to talk to us about this or want us to talk to you, we'll hang around for a while. Thank you.